All right. Thanks to everybody who's joined our webinar today. My name is Mara Smith, and today I'll be talking to you about endorsements in influencer marketing and giving you some insight into what you need to know when it comes to this topic. As most of you know, with the rapid rise of influencer marketing on social media, the FTC has taken notice and issued guidelines to ensure that consumers are acutely aware of what is an ad and what isn't an advertisement. So today, I'm going to share some of that info from the Federal Trade Commission with you so that you can use this information to apply it to your own campaigns, whether you're acting as an advertiser or as an agency, or even perhaps acting as a publisher. Before we get started, just two quick housekeeping items that I'd like to share with you. The first is that this presentation is meant to be informative, but in no way is it intended to serve as legal advice. It's really just information to inform you about the information that the FTC has provided as it relates to endorsements and the guidelines surrounding those. The second thing is we will be taking questions for the presentation. You can submit those through the question feature in the GoToWebinar. So feel free to submit those throughout the presentation, and I will try and reserve time at the end of this 30-minute session so that we can walk through and I can give you answers to all of the questions that you have. So let's get started. Before we dive into the actual content, I thought that I would just share a little bit about myself with you so that you know that I'm actually qualified to be talking about this topic. Again, my name is Mara Smith. I'm the Senior Vice President of Network Operations at Pepperjam. I've been in the industry for well over a decade. Consider myself to be an affiliate marketing subject matter expert. Outside of my experience in affiliate marketing, I went to the University of Delaware, go Blue Hens, and received my MBA from the University of Scranton. Scranton, some of you may be familiar with that term from the famed show The Office. And on a more personal note, I'm a mom raising 1.5 children because I do have a little one on the way, a husband and a poodle. And in my nearly non-existent free time, I enjoy pretending to be a fitness wannabe, fine wine when I'm not expecting, and copious amounts of shopping. But that's not why we're here. We're here to learn about FTC compliance as it relates to influencers and their endorsements. So I thought that I would start the presentation by giving you a little bit of guidance around what the FTC considers an endorsement. And given that influencer marketing is really a hot topic for both advertisers and influencers alike, I thought it would be worthwhile to kick this off and cover this content with you to ensure that you have access to all the information that matters in this rising segment of the market. So that is disclosures. What are they? Why do we have them? And why are they important? And so when we think about the FTC endorsement guidelines, basically they state that if there is a quote unquote material connection between an endorser and an advertiser, or perhaps a connection that might affect the weight or credibility that consumers give the endorsement, that's a connection that should be clearly and conspicuously disclosed unless it's already clear to the reader in the context of the communication that they're reading. So what that means in layman's terms is if there's a relationship in which one party is receiving some exchange of value, for instance, in the form of payment, free products, or services, that connection needs to be disclosed to the reader in the content that they are consuming. So what I'd like to do is take a closer look at who these endorsers are and give you a little bit more insight into what constitutes an endorsement. So the FTC defines an influencer as individuals or organizations that provide an endorsement. If you looked at the e-marketer definition of influencers, they'll say that these are individuals that can sway the brand preferences, buying decisions, and loyalty of the broader population. So while all online marketers have their own definition for influencer, the definition that you should pay particular attention to is that of the Federal Trade Commission. So they're defining an influencer as an individual or an organization that provides an endorsement. So you could essentially think of influencers and endorsers as one and the same. But in considering both of these definitions from the FTC and eMarketer, one can reasonably conclude that influencers are consumers of products that have the power to persuade other consumers in the purchase journey through their endorsement or their recommendation of a brand or a product or a service. So you might be wondering, if that's true, then how is an influencer different from any other affiliate or an endorser? And during this webinar, that's my goal, is to explore this question in more depth and provide you with insight into the guidelines and best practices that online marketers can utilize when leveraging these highly influential channel of marketers. So it might be easy to take a look at a visual example. So here we have two visual examples of a non-endorser and an endorser. On the left, we have an Instagram post from Topshop promoting their own line of apparel on Instagram to their followers. There's no material connection because Topshop is a brand that consumers know and purchase from. The point is that this is not necessarily a misleading post to consumers because they know Topshop is simply promoting their own products because they're a merchant or seller of goods. Whereas on the right, you'll see that we have the notorious Kim Kardashian, who also uses Instagram to promote, in this case, a medication for morning sickness during pregnancy. In Kim's example, there's no disclosure to the consumer that Kim actually has a material connection with the drug manufacturer, and that she's actually being compensated for advertising the product to her following. So in this post, it may or may not be known to the reader or the consumers that this is actually a true representation of and an honest opinion of Kim of the product. And the reason is that because, well, number one, you can clearly see here in the comments from Flawless Fashion Store indicating that she doesn't know if Kim is getting paid for this post. So fact right there. And number two, with the rise of social media platforms like Instagram, especially for celebrities, it's not always clear and conspicuous to readers that this is in fact an advertisement. And that's because that there's barely any disclosure. And in this example, the disclosure is buried so deep in the post that it's difficult for consumers to find. So it ultimately impacts the consumer's ability to discern what is a personal claim versus a claim on behalf of the drug manufacturer in this case. This example of Kim's post is actually really interesting because not only is it not following or complying with FTC endorsement guidelines, but in this example, the FDA actually sent a warning letter to the manufacturer following Kim's post, and it prompted her to take action and issue a corrective ad notice and a statement on the post to ensure that readers had all of the information and the proper links to learn more about the drug risks and limitations. So kind of an interesting example because she had to go back and revamp her initial post and claim. But really the point here is that there's a difference in the two posts because it needs to be clear to the consumer if there's a material connection. Material connections need to be disclosed in order for readers to truly discern what's an advertisement versus what is the personal opinion or belief of an individual or a brand or an organization. So you might be thinking, since you're in the affiliate industry, how are influencers different from affiliates? So to help determine the difference between an endorser, an influencer, and an affiliate. We're going to break down each model. According to the FTC, in their endorsement guidelines, an influencer is defined as an individual or organization that provides an endorsement. An endorser is the party whose opinion, beliefs, findings, or experience appears to reflect the endorser and may be that of an individual group or an institution. The endorser's role in online marketing is to endorse products, which could be deemed as an endorsement. So often we see the term endorser bucketed with other terms like blogger or other endorser, but they're essentially endorsing a product or a service based on the message that they're displaying to their users. An affiliate, as the FTC defines, they indicate that affiliate, the way they reference affiliates is that affiliate links within the guide says you're endorsing a specific online retailer to whom you're linking. So knowing that you're getting paid if the consumer purchases an item from that retailer rather than from another one, it might affect the weight that that reader gives your endorsement of that retailer. So basically, we start to see a theme around these terms and these definitions, especially as it pertains to the word endorsement. So whether you say influencer or affiliate, publisher, endorser, they're all the same from a regulatory perspective. If there is commercial intent behind the marketing of a product, that could be deemed as an endorsement and would therefore require proper disclosure to the end reader. So you're probably now thinking, well, what does that mean? What do I have to do? Do you need to disclose affiliate links since you're being compensated or your publishers are being compensated for the use of them? According to the FTC, so long as you disclose that as a publisher that you're being compensated clearly and conspicuously on your side, readers can use that to decide how much weight they want to give that endorsement. But you need to know that burying those disclosures deep into the website on, say, like the About Us page or the general information page, or a page that's just not easily found is not enough. Disclosures need to be front and center, especially as it relates to product reviews in particular. So be mindful of that as a publisher and in affiliate marketing. That being said, so long as you have made it clear that your website content is paid advertising, you don't need to make individual ad disclosures all over your site. The point is that you should be reasonable about disclosures and ensure that the disclosures are clear and available to the reader or consumer. So you might be wondering, well, what is the responsibility of the influencer? As a third-party marketing partner, influencers are responsible for ensuring compliance with all federal, state, and local laws. The FTC's Act is one of the most referenced sections for laws as it relates to online marketers, which basically states anything affecting commerce are declared hereby unlawful. This is really the most commonly referenced section. And basically what it entails is, in a nutshell, is that in your marketing, you need to be truthful to your readers. Within Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission's Act, it's pretty broad. So what the government did was they issued some guidelines to help online marketers stay compliant with the law because it was so broad and not necessarily clear. They issued these guidelines so that they could help marketers comply with the acts that they were putting out. So one of the most referenced guides is the guidelines for influencer marketing. It's called the endorsement guidelines. There's also the .com disclosure guide. Both of those outline the responsibility of the influencer to disclose their material connections with advertisers. And one of the most important responsibilities influencers have is, again, to properly disclose their material relationships with advertisers. It needs to be an accurate and prominent disclosure. The language can make all the difference between compliance and non-compliance with the FTC. So we're going to take a deeper look in disclosures and the laws surrounding them. So the first is, what is a disclosure? You've heard me mention this word over and over again today, but a disclosure, it's important to keep in mind that a disclosure is basically a statement that modifies a claim. So if influencers are making unsubstantiated claims about an advertiser's products or services, they need to ensure that they have proper disclosure language included in that advertisement. Having proper disclosure language helps prevent consumers from being misled or deceived. So it's important that influencers provide all of that information a consumer would need in order to make a purchasing decision. So in the visual examples that you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, the first is from Marcel Flores. He's an influential Instagram personality. His brand is One Dapper Street. And in this post, if you can read the text, a little bit smaller, but if you can read it, it basically discloses that his post is advertising Bonobos products. The first thing that he said at the beginning of the post is, number one, this is for charity. But then two, as you read further into the text, you'll see that he indicates that it's sponsored, the content is sponsored through the use of the hashtag sponsored at the end of the post. He probably could have mentioned sponsored in the beginning of the post rather than at the end. But at the very least, the disclosure is included so that the reader sees that when consuming the content. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, we have another Kardashian star. His name is Scott Disick. And he made a post on Instagram about a protein powder. And what was really interesting is that he opened up a can of worms, because when you see like the text within the post, he actually posted the directive text from the sponsor telling him to post the content at 4 p.m. with the word caption, and then a colon detailing the contents of the post. It was a pretty hilarious fail on his part. But what was even more alarming was the fact that this was evidence that this was a post that contained content that wasn't of his own opinion, because he was clearly being directed. And even still, it was a failure to actually disclose that this was a sponsorship overall. So differences: providing a disclosure in Instagram posts, letting the consumer know that something is sponsored versus not doing so at all, can be misleading to the end user. And it's up to us as marketers to make sure that that information is there for the consumer to discern. Okay, so when it comes to disclosures as an advertiser, there is a responsibility as an advertiser to ensure that your influencers, that you're giving your influencers a directive around what they need to disclose within their post. So you need to protect your brand. So it's important that you can communicate this to that segment of your marketing program. So there's a really easy mnemonic from the FTC to help keep disclosures top of mind when it comes to doing it properly. So the FTC refers to this as the 4 Ps. And many of you are probably thinking of the 4 Ps and thinking back to Marketing 101, but it's not those 4 Ps. They actually have a different significance when it comes to disclosures. So the way the FTC details the 4 Ps, the first is prominence. And what marketers need to ask themselves, are the disclosures big enough for consumers to read easily? Basically, what this means is the user shouldn't need a magnifying glass to identify the disclosure, nor should it be so deeply buried within the text and body of the content. It should be easy for them to find. It also should be present and available. It shouldn't be a disclosure that flashes and then is immediately taken away from the screen. Nor should the disclosure fade into a background color. So these are all very deceptive tactics that influencers can use, but they should definitely stay away from in order to ensure compliance with FTC regulations. So prominence, just remember, is the disclosure big enough for consumers to read easily? The second P is presentation. So marketers need to ask themselves, is the disclosure worded in a way that consumers can easily understand? Specifically, disclosures shouldn't use complicated legalese or language that a consumer doesn't understand. For example, I'm sure many of you have seen examples in which influencers have used the hashtag SPON, S-P-O-N, short form for sponsored. Influencers shouldn't use that hashtag as a disclosure because they shouldn't imply that a consumer knows that that is short form for the word sponsored. So again, disclosures need to be easily understood by the consumer or the reader. Third P is placement. And when it comes to placement, geography really matters, and marketers need to ask themselves, is the disclosure where consumers are likely to look? So specifically, disclosures should not be put so far into the footnotes or at the end of a post where consumers aren't likely to look for the disclosure. They should be put at the beginning of the post where they're easily viewable by the reader. The fourth and final P is proximity. So is the disclosure close to the claim it modifies? So writing a product review, you might want to think about putting the disclosure next to it so that they appear as one seamless thought related to one another, rather than keeping the disclosure so far from the product review post that the end user or reader don't make the connection that they are related. Another thing to note when it comes to proximity, if you're going to use an asterisk as a way to put your disclosure at the end of a post, you need to contemplate that and refer to FTC regulation because that's not always sufficient enough for the readers. So when it comes to disclosures, there is certainly a lot to think about, but just remember the general rule of thumb that disclosures should be clear and conspicuous. There isn't a magic font size or standard one-size-fits-all disclosure placement type. As marketers, we should be practical and put ourselves into the reader's shoes to make sure that disclosures are clear and easily understood. All right, I'm going to show some disclosure examples to you. Okay, so a couple examples of different types of content, different content mediums. We have an example from Rachel Parcell on Instagram. We have a blog post from a blog called Stuff Parents Need, and then we have a Snapchat story, all of which have disclosures contained within them. So you'll see in the blog post from Stuff Parents Need, we've highlighted in the post in a red circle there that the disclosure is prominently placed in the blog so that it's at the beginning of the post and a reader knows that the blogger is getting compensated in some way, shape, or form for the content that they're reviewing. In all of these examples, the language of the disclosure is easily understood by the end reader, and it's not written in legalese or in a different language for that matter, and they're all easily identifiable by the consumer. So in the Snapchat example, you'll see that the sponsored hashtag is at the very beginning of the post. It's the contrast of the sponsored hashtag is enough such that it doesn't blend into the sky blue background. And in the example of the Instagram post, you can see that the post is hashtagged ad, so that the end user knows that this is an actual advertisement by the influencer. All right, so according to the FTC, simply posting a picture of a product in social media, such as on Pinterest, or a video that you might be using or a publisher is using, could convey that the influencer likes and approves of the product. If that is the case, it's an endorsement and it needs to be disclosed. So that's according to the FTC. And their endorsement guideline references the placements of disclosures on social media platforms as a key factor to ensuring that transparency exists to consumers. So for example, one of the ways in which users can identify an endorsement is through the use of hashtags. So we can see on the right-hand side, there's the example of the hashtag ad. However, probably this is a good example because ad is at the beginning of the post. However, if the influencer had buried the hashtag ad into the middle of other hashtags or into the middle of the content, or even at the end of all of the content that they were posting, it can often be overlooked by the consumer. So you want to avoid that and always defer to posting the hashtags or the disclosures at the beginning of the content. So it's easily, viewable by the consumers. The guide also suggests that online marketers use disclosures in each ad because one cannot assume a consumer saw the original ad that the disclosure was associated with. So you should do it every time to ensure that consumers are getting the disclosures and all of the content that they consume. And finally, on stories, like on Instagram and on Snapchat, disclosures have to be superimposed into the story. The one thing that you need to think about is that audio disclosures alone are not sufficient because not all consumers or consumers of content necessarily have the audio on. So you have to realize that an audio disclosure is not necessarily sufficient. There also needs to be a text-based disclosure in the story. And you have to ensure that the disclosure has enough contrast between the background so that the text does not blend in with the story itself. Okay, so last year, I believe it was twice in 2017, the FTC sent warning letters out to various influencers, online marketers, celebrities, specifically for Instagram, and they wanted them to keep in mind some of the regulations specifically for mobile. So what they stated was that the first thing is consumers don't necessarily know what short form hashtags or text like SP mean. You've probably seen examples where influencers or celebrities have used the short form SP hashtag in lieu of the word sponsored. But it's not enough. It's not enough for a consumer to know that this means that it's an advertisement or that there's a material connection between the influencer and an advertiser. So definitely avoid the short form because it's misleading. And the same goes for other examples like an influencer saying, thanks brand X, Y, or Z, or presented by brand XYZ. It's not enough. It doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a connection to the end reader and consumer. The other thing is consumers typically only see the first 3 lines of, say, an Instagram post unless they click the More button to read the full post. Sometimes they don't do that. So disclosures should by default be at the beginning of a post or without prompting the consumer to click more in order to see the actual disclosure hashtag. The final thing is that there's been several recommendations that the FTC has provided to ensure that influencer posts are compliant. And so according to the FTC, consumers will likely understand that a post is sponsored if the post includes terms such as ad or advertisement, paid advertisement, sponsored advertising content, or some other variation of those terms. So those are probably the safest disclosure terms for your influencers to use when thinking about your influencer marketing. Okay, and disclosures can take different mediums. So the FTC's disclosure guideline states that whatever form of an ad is communicated in, it must have the same form of disclosure. So if you're promoting products through social media platforms like YouTube, you should use both audio and visual cues to disclose. You should also not assume that a consumer has speakers or that the sound is turned on. So always default to using visuals as well as audio cues to ensure that the customer or consumer is aware the video is sponsored or an advertisement. The requirements for visual disclosure are that the text should be displayed for sufficient duration for a consumer to notice, read, and understand. So keep these best practices in mind for live video. And also think about displaying a static disclosure on the video screen or having a rolling marquee. The disclosure should be verbalized frequently throughout the message. Finally, if you're communicating your message in a foreign language, then that disclosure must be in the same language. So don't try and mislead your consumers by using two different languages. So we have two other visuals here. The first one on the left is from Charlotte Shore, and you'll see in her post that she's used the hashtag SPON, which is short form for sponsored. So again, this is a no-no. It should be the full text so that it's easy for the consumer to understand. And then again, on the right, we have, again, Scott Disick, Kardashian star. And in this post, he's saying thank you or thanks to Jet Lux Life, which is not enough for the consumer to realize that there's a material connection. So two no-nos to stay away from when it comes to disclosures. Okay, when it comes to marketing claims, for claims like buy one, get one free, BOGO, 2-for-1, gift, or gift with purchase, there's a reference into federal regulation to ensure compliance for these types of marketing initiatives. So the code states that when you're making a quote unquote free or similar claim, all the terms and conditions that are contingent on receiving the free item should be set forth clearly and conspicuously so that at the outset of the offer, so that the consumer can see it, and there's no reasonable probability that the terms of the offer might be misunderstood. So in the example image, we see that there's an influencer here writing about a jewelry subscription and directs the consumer to enter a code to receive a free trial, and in turn, she would receive a commission for the sign up. However, in the example, she fails to disclose the terms of the offer, which state that you have to pay a deposit to start the subscription service should you decide to cancel prior to the trial period ending. So all of the terms and conditions contingent on receiving the free item should be set forth clearly at the outset of the offer so the consumer sees that up front. Quick bit on guarantees. The FTC guide for advertising of warranties and guarantees states that if your ad uses phrases like satisfaction guaranteed or money back guarantee, you must be willing to give full refunds for any reason. Also, you need to state all of the terms and conditions upon receiving that full reference clearly and conspicuously to the consumer. So again, things to think about when it comes to disclosures. So at this time, I'm going to be opening up for questions. Okay, we have a question here about influencers that are existing customers. And the question is, the description and question are, we contact existing customers and ask them to share their love for our service. In return, we compensate the customer for any new customers that are converted through a special code we provide. Does this person need to provide explicit copy to indicate they are going to get a reward for new business that they are responsible for driving? So again, this presentation is not meant to serve as legal advice, but given the information that the FTC has provided, I would definitely take a look at those guidelines to see what makes sense for your brand and also contact your own counsel. But it's always best to err on the side of caution and ensure that if you're providing some form of compensation or reward, product, good, or service, or even a discount, it's better to err on the side of caution and use a disclosure. Okay, there was a question about disclosures in Facebook. Can you use a link to the terms? So not quite sure specifically what the question is asking, but if you are leveraging influencers in Facebook and there is a material connection between your brand and the influencer on Facebook, highly suggest that they're disclosing it upfront so that the end reader or consumer knows. You can link to the terms, but I would also err on the side of caution and put a hashtag as ad or sponsored in addition to a link to the terms. All right, I think those are all of the questions that we had for today. If there's any additional questions following today's session, feel free to reach out to me. My contact details and email address are up on the screen. We will be following up in a blog and providing a link to this recording should you have missed portions of it or want to refer back to it. So again, thank you so much for attending today. Really appreciate it and have a great day.